There are many myths and misconceptions in woodworking, and no doubt you've heard a lot of these. From needing expensive tools to create quality work, to thinking CNCs, lasers and dominoes are cheating. Or that the use of a single screw is woodworking blasphemy. But one of my personal favourites is that veneering isn't real woodworking, that it's fake. Now, my initial reaction is that the folks that believe this could also be found in the dark depths of a Flat Earth Reddit forum. But after weeks of building this cabinet, part of me was starting to agree with these folks. About the veneer, not the flat earth. Let me just clarify that. But the main intention behind this video is to delve into the complexity of veneering and whether or not you can build a high-end piece of furniture using MDF and veneer. Or perhaps this piece is destined for the bright showroom floors of IKEA. Hopefully, this video will disprove some of these myths, or who knows, we may even prove them. Like, I mean, Bigfoot, right? From what I've heard, footprints have been seen. Granted, not by the most reputable sources, but still, there's a chance that he's actually out there. I can't help but think that for some people, the words veneer and high-end furniture don't belong in the same sentence, and I've always wondered about this. To me, veneer is just another skill to add in a woodworker's bag of tricks. It's a way to enhance your pieces, whether it just be a small detail or in this case, an entire cabinet. And the reality is, due to wood movement, some things just aren't possible to build with a thick piece of wood. So veneer is generally the only choice, and if done correctly, can look incredible. Understandably, some of the materials I'm going to be using in this build aren't exactly exciting. Raw MDF, veneered MDF, and plywood. But it's this stuff that will change everything. This is Poplar Burl veneer, and it's some of the best I've ever seen. And a big thank you has to go out to Britain Timbers for sourcing this veneer and making a project like this even possible. As always, I'll leave a link below to their website if you want to know more about what they do. Now, some of you may be wondering what veneer even is. Basically, it's just a thin sheet of wood that's glued down to a substrate like plywood or MDF to give the appearance of solid wood. It's usually used for its stability, and it doesn't expand and contract the way solid wood does. Veneer also allows you to get a higher yield out of your stock, which is especially important with the rare and expensive wood species. Now, there's debate about how thick a piece of veneer can go before it's no longer classified as a veneer, and personally I don't think there's an exact measurement, but the best explanation I've heard is veneer is thin enough once its seasonal movement is overcome by its substrate. Understandably, that's a little vague, but 2mm or less should be fine depending on the wood species. Carcass construction. This is generally the stuff you learn as a cabinet making apprentice. How to construct boxes. Lots and lots of boxes. I've built so many boxes that I've purposely directed my business as far away from this type of work as possible. But in this scenario, this construction is the foundation for my veneer, and the better this foundation is constructed, the better the final outcome will be. To some, it may seem a little unnecessary for the rebate joints where the curved top and bottom meets the uprights, but the reason for this level of detail is those uprights will be seen, as one piece is the back and the other is the internal upright of the cabinet, and I don't want to see any MDF butt joints or fixings in these areas. This is just one example of many of how thinking ahead is necessary for a high-end result. With the two ends created, it's time to move on to the secret weapon of this piece, the flexible plywood. You're going to see it used quite a bit throughout this build in a number of different ways. And even though it's just plywood and not exactly an appealing looking finish, this material is going to create the unique shape of the overall cabinet. This is Titebond Original, a common glue amongst woodworkers these days. And it's important to note that not all Titebonds are created equal, and it may not be for the reasons that you think it is. I'll get to talking about glues in a minute, but I think one misconception amongst those that are starting out is that all wood glues are created equal, which just isn't the case. Titebond Original is one of 3 carefully considered glues I've used in this cabinet. Each one has a different purpose, and I'll get into detail shortly. I can't tell you how many times I've used this vacuum press table since building it, and I'm very pleased with how it's turned out. In fact, it's so easy to use that I look for excuses to use it, which means you're going to be seeing a lot of vacuum pressing in this video, which is made possible with my vacuum pump from VacuPress. Another reason to why veneering is a skill is because it does require you to create forms in order to shape, press, and create the ideas you're after, which once again requires the maker to think ahead. Earlier you saw me create a form that is actually part of the cabinet. Now I'm creating a different form that is separate to the cabinet but will help create components to the cabinet. This particular form will help shape the curved doors, which are a little more complex than what you might think. At first glance, it seems as though these doors are simple enough. Both have a slight curve to help create a little more depth to the overall cabinet, but that curve doesn't end here. They are also going to curve where the doors meet in the center, creating a split door effect, but this creates a bit of a problem. You see, the further I bring in that curve at the top of the door, the less the door will protrude out of the cabinet, which in turn affects the shape of the top. So, by simply angling the door template on the oversized door panels and lining up the bottom of the door in the same line as the top of the door, I'm maintaining the same protrusion. So even though the top and bottom curves are different, they still protrude out of the cabinet the same amount. For me, woodworking is a mental game just as much as it is a skill-based game. But it was up until this point that I felt like I wasn't really being challenged. Carcass construction isn't exactly what I call a good time, and I'll admit that this is where I started to concede to the misconception that veneering isn't real woodworking. I mean, it's a little hard to believe that this is woodworking when your shop floor is caked with MDF sawdust, not to mention the fact that I hadn't even used my workbench or any of my hand tools. But this is the point where this piece is about to get a whole lot more interesting, and after a quick tidy up, I can finally get back to some regular scheduled woodworking. At this point, the doors are undersized, and because that flexible plywood is a little bit soft, I want to edge it with some solid wood. The top, bottom, and hinge sides of these doors are fairly straightforward, although I'm going to add a little more to the hinge side shortly to help give the hinges something more solid to bite into. The important thing to note here is the side where the doors meet. This will be the handle side, and once again, it's where forethought is necessary as I will be routing out a chamfered handle later, and it's important that I cut into solid wood and not the plywood. With the overall shape of the doors almost done, there's one last detail that needs to be completed. You see, at this point, due to the square edge of the handle side of the doors, when the doors meet, the front edges of the doors don't touch. So I need to plane them at the correct angle, and the easiest way to do this is to create a temporary shooting board. Now, as always, I have to give a big shout out to all these Patreon supporters. It's thanks to their support that allows me to make these YouTube videos. Now, they get access to nearly 300 exclusive videos, from behind the scenes to quick tip videos to long form topic videos. One of the more recent ones is a 30-minute in-depth video all about veneering, where I discuss different glues, types of veneers, and different methods used. Not to mention the 6-part extended cut of this very build, as well as a 35-minute detailed review video of this cabinet. Now, if you like my YouTube videos and would like more regular videos from me, then consider signing up to Patreon. I'll leave some links below if you're interested. Finally, the main structure of the cabinet is complete, and it's time to finish it off with this incredible Poplar Burl veneer. Now, for those that don't know, a burl is a rounded, lumpy growth on a tree caused by stress or disease. And while it might look a little rough on the outside, the inside reveals beautifully figured, complex grain patterns that interlock in unpredictable ways. Unfortunately, this unpredictability makes the veneer brittle and prone to buckling or rippling, which is why this burl has been pressed onto a second veneer, creating a 2-ply sheet. Now, one of the key differences between high-end furniture and cheaper pieces is grain continuity. This is how the grain flows seamlessly across components. To achieve this, I've carefully marked and cut each piece so the veneer panels will align perfectly when everything comes together at the end. Out of the 3 glues I've used on this project, this is by far the most important. When you're gluing veneer to a substrate, there are 2 big problems you need to watch out for: bleed through and creep. Bleed through happens when the glue seeps through the veneer, which is really common with burls because of their porous, complex grain. The other common veneering problem is called creep, which is when the veneer shifts or moves over the substrate, even once the glue is dry. This is commonly due to changes in humidity or temperature. Again, this is a big deal with burls, but can also happen with any veneer, as the incorrect glue can soften in changing environments, and like I said, can result in a veneer that moves over its substrate. To avoid this, you need a glue that dries hard, which is why I'm using a urea formaldehyde glue. It has a long open time, dries super hard, works great with vacuum pressing, and is easy to spread evenly. Now, you can use PVA glues, some of which are specifically designed for veneering, and some of which are more common PVAs that are easily accessible to everyone, like Type 1 Original. It dries hard and doesn't bleed through for the most part, although it does have a little bit of flex to it. But generally speaking, it can be a good glue for veneering. In fact, you'll see me using it a little later. Type 1 3, on the other hand, isn't a good choice because it dries flexible due to its water-resistant formula. One thing I will say when using a glue for the first time is to always run some test samples first to ensure it's the right glue for the job. Now, I will admit, I'm not a huge fan of edging pieces like this. I usually like to have solid wood edging or binding, as it provides a harder wearing edge and allows an opportunity for different edge details like chamfers or roundovers. But to get that consistent grain flow, as well as needing to cover up that 2-ply veneer, this was the best path forward. With Type 1 Original, an iron, and some burl veneer without the 2nd ply, I take my time and ensure that the edge strip is properly glued to all the edges. I've always wondered why there's a misconception about veneering. Perhaps it's because some people associate veneer with cheap, mass-produced furniture, which is fair. And there may also be a level of romanticism behind handcrafted furniture made from solid wood. But I guess this raises the question, what is woodworking? Is it only real woodworking if it's created by an old guy in a shed with nothing but a workbench and a sharp blade? Or is woodworking a skill made up of many other skills? Skills that are accessible to anyone who's interested. There are many furniture makers out there that have made a name for themselves creating beautiful pieces from veneer. But I guess that question of what is woodworking raises a bunch of other misconceptions or myths. Are CNCs, lasers and dominoes cheating? Or, my other favourite, that you need expensive tools to create quality work. Now, I know this one's a little rich coming from me, a guy with a workshop full of tools, and especially seeing me talk about veneering while I use an expensive vacuum press setup. But the reality is, when it comes to woodworking, there's always a cheaper solution. Yes, it takes more time and effort, and the results may not be as consistent, but these factors come down to your skills, patience, and imagination. For example, you don't need a vacuum press setup to get into veneering. You can simply use clamping coils to get even clamping pressure on flat surfaces, or get creative with unusual shaped forms to veneer curved pieces. This cabinet can be done using creative clamping forms and coils. It will be a little more difficult and use a lot more material, but it is possible. This is the reason why professionals invest in expensive tools. They make the job faster and more reliable. And for those that think woodworking is easy with a shop full of expensive tools, well, all I can say to that is if you don't know how to use them and you don't have the imagination to create beautiful things with them, then these are some very expensive rust buckets that will never get used to their full potential. I've been waiting for this moment for quite some time now. This next section is a little experimental for me. I wasn't sure if the PVC pipe would hold up, and I wasn't sure if the curved plywood would maintain its shape. But what I'm basically trying to do here is create the component that will fill in the gap between the two doors, while also bringing in a new material to this piece, one that will create another texture and colour. You're now seeing me use the third type of glue for this project, Technoglue. It's a thick epoxy, dries hard, and something I have confidence in as I've used it many times before. There's going to be quite a bit of tension in this component, and if this glue can hold shapes like this and this, then it will easily hold the shape that I'm after. Personally, I like to have a plan when building pieces. I find it allows for things to run smoother and quicker, but unfortunately it stops you from coming up with spontaneous ideas. The whiskey cabinet that I recently built was a piece with no defined parameters. I was essentially coming up with ideas as I went, and I found that I was building myself into a corner, then I would have to design my way out of it. But it did open itself up to some unusual and unique ideas and techniques that I would have never come across otherwise. This piece, on the other hand, is for a client, and the design and plan were created well before the materials were ordered. In fact, I designed this piece nearly 3 years ago and was very excited when my client recently contacted me asking for a Burl cabinet. I showed her my design and she signed off on it almost immediately. I have to say, after the whiskey cabinet, it was refreshing to be able to walk into my shop every morning knowing exactly what I had to do and how to do it. Everything apart from this component. I knew a cove had to be built to close the gap between the doors, but I wasn't entirely sure how to accomplish it. So I was kind of making things up as I went, and part of me thinks I kind of fluked it because this component turned out surprisingly well for something that didn't have a plan. I do have to say that the experience with the whiskey cabinet has taught me a lot. Not everything needs to be planned and not everything needs to be free and flowing. For me, a combination of both is a good place to be. As you can see, I'm trying to attach this cove to one of the doors, but due to all the curvature and different angles, Trying to figure out some hidden fixings not only seems overly complicated, but I feel like I'm also running the risk of some major inaccuracies. So it only makes sense to just drill straight through the cove and into the door, which will then allow me to insert some dowels. All of these holes will get covered up with another piece of veneer shortly. Now, I would have preferred to have had this cove attached to the cabinet and not the door, creating somewhat of a division. But due to the size of the cabinet, there wouldn't have been much internal storage space. So attaching it to the door was the best solution for this particular design. Next, I'm going to move on to the part that's either going to make or break this cabinet, as I'm going to introduce a new color and texture into this piece. So I now officially have some of my work available at Lura Fine Woodwork Gallery for people to see in person and of course purchase if you wish. I currently have 2 pieces available, my leaf table and my curved bench seat. There's also a ton of other pieces on show by some incredible woodworkers for you to see. So if you're in the area, go check it out, and if you're interested in purchasing, I'll leave the gallery's contact info below. The unfortunate thing about burl veneer is all the knot holes. There's hundreds if not thousands of them. For me, the easiest way to fill them is to use a non-shrinking water-based putty, mix it with water until it has a creamy consistency, then drop it into each hole. Firstly, this stops you from having to use a spatula and spread the filler across the surface of the veneer. This method will end up filling all the pores around the knots. Secondly, using a putty is way easier to sand. The last thing you would want to use on a thin veneer is epoxy, as you'll run the risk of burning through the veneer. Remember, you're not stabilizing anything here, you're simply just filling some holes, so this putty works just fine. To me, woodworking is about the relationship between your mind and your hands. Being able to imagine something, then having the skills to make it is a feeling that will never get old for me. And this is why learning as many skills under the woodworking umbrella is so important, because it allows you to accomplish whatever your imagination can come up with. Veneering is certainly one of those skills. Now, I feel like a lot of you watching already know this, but hopefully for you non-believers, This video has shown the level of detail and knowledge that goes into a custom piece made from veneer. Understandably, most of you don't really care about these kind of myths and misconceptions, most likely because you're experienced and don't want to waste your time. But that doesn't mean that these beliefs don't affect some, particularly those starting out. Personally, I think the lesson to take away from all this is who cares? If you're enjoying yourself, then do it. Woodworking is hard enough as it is, and to put someone down because they're not doing it the way that you want them to isn't what this craft is about. If you want to get into veneering, just remember it doesn't have to be as complicated as what I've shown, and you don't need an expensive vacuum press setup. There's plenty of videos out there on clamping calls, and if it doesn't interest you, then there's plenty of other woodworking skills out there for you to learn and enjoy. All I know is I got to build something that I really enjoyed building for someone who was very happy with their new piece of furniture. And this was a great reminder that veneering is addictive. The possibilities are endless, and I can't wait to do more.